Hey there, and welcome to an unproduced rant on the topic of Nord Stream II. Nord Stream II is a pipeline going between Russia and Germany. It is a massive infrastructure development that does have real geopolitical significance. Europe is incredibly reliant on gas from Russia for its power needs, and what Nord Stream does is sort of cut out the middleman. Many of the gas pipelines that currently exist go through Ukraine. Russia doesn't like Ukraine, doesn't like paying to send gas through Ukraine, so Nord Stream exists to work around that. There is already a Nord Stream pipeline. What's at issue today is Nord Stream II, which would double the capacity of that pipeline. I think it does involve building new physical pipelines, but this is something that already exists. This absolutely does have geopolitical significance. This is something that is debatably bad, environmentally speaking, and certainly bad for Ukraine. It's something that Europeans should argue over and think about. But that's not the real significance of what's going on here. I believe that actually what's going on with Nord Stream, the controversy around it, and specifically the way that the United States is involved in it, is actually a greater threat to the United States, a vastly greater threat to the United States and its sort of world dominance than the pipeline itself. It's what it is it's a sign of a new step in U.S. empire and what it believes that it should be able to get away with. This is one of the one of many really screwed up legacies of the Trump administration, but it's not actually something that Trump did. It is a reaction to Trump that the U.S. Congress got involved in. Nord Stream 2, love it or hate it, at the end of the day, it is a decision that the German government has made of what to do with its own land, with its own money, with its own energy future. I'm well aware that Poland and Ukraine don't like this, but it's German land, it's German money, it's their decision. And I think that it's debatably appropriate to some degree for the United States to negotiate with Germany over this, but not in the way that these negotiations are being portrayed in the U.S. press and in the U.S. Congress. So what's going on here is something that is known as a secondary sanction. This is something I talk a lot about on the channel, and I really should talk about a lot more. It's most famously used when we're dealing with Iran and Syria, countries without a lot of economic weight, that nobody really cares about that much. Even in the case of Iran, it's gotten embarrassing enough for the European governments. It's impacted the sovereignty of European governments enough that they're complaining. But essentially, a secondary sanction is not the U.S. government saying that U.S. government entities or people that deal with U.S. business can't deal with Iran or Syria. It's saying that no country in the world, no business person in the world, even if there's no real connection to the United States other than using U.S. dollars occasionally, cannot do business with these countries. When you're dealing with Iran and Syria, again, not a lot of economic weight, not a lot of geopolitical significance, despite the amount of time we talk about them in the news. But now, with this Nord Stream thing, in response to the Congress's sort of loathing of Donald Trump and his supposed relationship to Russia, there was a shift. In the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis in 2014, Europe and the United States worked very closely together to put together sanctions. And, in some arenas, Europe was less willing to do sanctions against Russia than the United States was, which makes sense. But it was a negotiation. In the context of Donald Trump being president, the U.S. Congress just started making demands and started legislating secondary sanctions. This is a difficult thing for it to do directly because, the executive branch generally handles sort of foreign policy stuff. But yeah, it is now mandated, not just specifically that the executive branch, so the Congress has mandated that the executive branch takes certain steps against the Russian oil and gas industry. It's not just mandated that it do that, but it's also mandated that the president take certain steps against the Nordstream II pipeline significantly. And this is obviously a case of folks in the U.S. Congress not just trying to put themselves into this geopolitical issue to a higher degree than they should. It's also a case of the United States trying to defend its growing market in Europe. It's basically a way to sell more U.S. gas by blocking more Russian gas, which is deeply screwed up. And it's amazing that these things went forward without European consent or agreement in a number of sort of legislative steps in 2017 with that sanctions package then, but most importantly in 2019 with the Protecting Europe's Energy Security Act, or PISA, that was passed in 2019. And this is I think on Twitter I've made it clear just how infuriating I find this. This is about protecting Europe and working more closely with our allies, and it is restricting what one of our allies can do, and not just one of our allies, but one of the wealthiest and most powerful of our allies. We are supposedly in this period where we're getting more and more serious about confronting China and things like this. Yet what we seem to be expending an incredible amount of time and political capital on is telling one of our most important neighbors what it can and cannot do. I have a deep-seated sort of moral objection to this sort of thing. Sovereignty is important. There are limits to sovereignty, of course. It's important that we shouldn't allow folks to go crazy and murder all their people. But as respect for sovereignty goes further and further down, and it becomes clear that the U.S. system isn't interested in letting people do what they want, I think the chances of destabilization, mass destruction, actually go up. But also just deep-seated, the United States is about freedom and self-determination in my very naive way of looking at things. And to have the United States slowly become this country that tells people more and more what they should be doing is insane to me. And it's and this is of course probably a racist instinct on me, but we're not just kicking around the Middle East anymore. We're now kicking Germany around. And there's that moral objection on my part, and the idea that we fundamentally should not be doing this thing because it is a counter to the values of the United States. That's like a romantic thing, and I'm sure there are many people watching now who are laughing at me for this idea that U.S. hegemony puts forward certain values, but I still hold it, and I still believe that to be important. But beyond that, there's the practical nuts and bolts facts of this. I talked last year about the real Thucydides trap, which is talking about how in ancient Greece, Sparta and Athens got together and they defeated the Persians, and it was sort of the Athenians that sort of took the lead on putting together this coalition and logistics and this, that, and the other thing. I see them very much as an analog to the United States. And after winning this big victory, after winning this big, say, Cold War against the Persians, as the United States won this big war against the Soviet Union, Athens didn't want to give up the alliance, wanted it to become more and more of a firm thing. The Athenian alliance, the Delian League, became the Athenian Empire. And that is totally what the United States is doing right here. And I think you will see the emergence in the United States of people that enjoy that are having fun with that. You can see that in the U.S. Congress right now, in fact. But it's so dangerous. And the story of Athens itself, the real Thucydides trap, indicates this. I mean, because Athens didn't just tear down its own power eventually through this selfishness. It also tore down the classical era of Greek civilization. After the war that Athens created by trying to turn the entire place into its own empire, really the Greek independence didn't become a thing again for, 2,000 years. So yeah, it's obviously, it's going to be a little different the way things play out. Athens versus Sparta is two little slave city-states that mostly lived on farming on a peninsula jutting off the bottom of Eurasia. But with the United States and a world system, things are going to be a lot bigger and a lot different. But the trajectory is the same. The United States is crafting an empire that just is getting more and more oppressive by the year. I know it sounds ridiculous to talk about Germans as being oppressed, but what you have to understand is it's part of a process of ratcheting up. This is something that's sort of disturbing. The secondary sanction isn't just a problem for the way that the United States interacts with its vassals in Europe. Stuff that we sort of mention only fleetingly in U.S. news is the fact that secondary sanctions are a tremendous part of the problem with U.S. relations with a whole range of powerful countries. There's the fact that the United States, this is not something we talk about so much in the United States because we don't want to think through the implications so much, but we arrested about 2 years ago one of the, I think the daughter of the founder and also the CFO of Huawei in Canada for busting secondary sanctions on Iran. So we arrested her, and she remains under house arrest in Canada, awaiting the processing of her case, which is kind of extraordinary when you think about it a little harder. We basically arrested we arrested China's Steve Jobs, and she's still sitting under house arrest in Canada for something that her business may or may not have done with Iran. This is not something we talk about much in the United States, but it is a huge part of the decline in U.S.-China relations over the past couple of years. A huge part. In Turkey, we talk a lot about how, I honestly haven't looked into the progress of this case. I don't know if it's finally been dealt with, but for most of a decade, there was an ongoing case in the state of New York talking about elements of the Turkish business class that may or may not have been closely tied to the Turkish government, who had violated our secondary sanctions on trading with Iran. And it's just kind of nuts. There's many issues between the United States and Turkey. Turkey's sort of trend towards a more oppressive government, the U.S. choice to get in bed with an organization that's closely tied to a terrorist organization that has led to a lot of death and destruction in Turkey. Those are real reasons, but this case, this fact that the United States was deciding to prosecute Turkish business people for actions that they had taken in a different country, dealing with a different country, was a big part of it remains a big part of the decay of U.S.-Turkish relations. And in both those cases, maybe not with China, the United States is going to get away with it. It's just fine. But as these things continue to ratchet up, as these issues continue to present themselves, it gets really damaging for U.S. prestige and our ability to exert power going forward. And it just makes the world worse. If it's clear that the United States, the most powerful country in the world, has no respect for anybody's independent action, which is the case, if that becomes clearer and clearer, the world is going to get more and more resentful. So Nord Stream 2 is, yeah, there is a geopolitical significance to that. I understand why Poland and Ukraine don't like it, but that's a European problem. That's for them to deal with. The fact that the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government has gotten this deeply involved in what Germany can and cannot do with its infrastructure and its business investment is really, really, really bad sign. And what's fascinating about this is it seems that the Biden administration actually agrees with that, can see that this Nord Stream 2 issue is going to really screw up any attempt to do anything else with Germany. I mean, keep in mind that Germany is in the process as being one of the lead actors in as the comprehensive investment treaty, I've gotten the acronym wrong, with China. And it's in the U.S. interest that not go too far. But if the United States successfully destroys the Nord Stream 2 project, which is mostly built, by the way, at the cost of $11 billion, then Germany and Europe are going to be a lot more interested in finding alternatives. And the problem, of course, is now that the Pandora's box has been opened and Congress really likes the idea of it, A, looking tough on Russia, and B, helping oil and gas exporters, which are now much more widely spread throughout the country than they used to be. Congress doesn't want to let this go, and what's really bothered me, surprised me about this, I mean, Congress being corrupt and looking for ways to grow U.S. empire that help them profit, that's normal. But what really bothers me is just the way that the U.S. media talks about this. There's a Bloomberg article over the past week, Politico article over the last week, that just sort of takes the side of Congress and thinks, is just sort of talking, well, what kind of, and these are news, well, one was an opinion article in Bloomberg, but it was a news article in Politico, be like, what would be the rational way for Germany to negotiate away its economic and financial and energy sovereignty with the United States? Maybe, the U.S. should allow Germany to complete this in return for hard commitments from Germany about it's like what, are you kidding me? This is insane. I mean, do we just own Europe? Is Europe just our vassal state and we can tell them whatever they want to do? I mean, arguably that's been true for quite some time, but we probably shouldn't rub Europe's nose in it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and if you want a free essay on a completely different topic, you can click the link here to sign up for my email newsletter. I think I'm getting those out on a monthly basis now, hoping to continue doing that. Thanks.